Thank you, Karen. It is one of the great pleasures of this work that we do. I say this all the time, is what we're trying to get done, but equally the people we get to do it with. And there is nobody I have enjoyed more working with over these last dozen years than Karen Sharp. So I just want to thank her. She is stubborn too, David. Man. The SOARS campaign of 2004. 2004 was, in any organization's life, you try to think about what are those moments, what are those breakout moments. And 2004 was definitely one of those years for us, because it was not only the year of the magnificent SOARS victory in Albany County, it was also the year of the minimum wage win, our first sort of signature accomplishment in Albany that made us, which we had worked on, nothing happens fast in this life, for 6 years. You would think it wouldn't take 6 years to raise the minimum wage for a million workers, but it did, and we would do it again. We would spend another 6 years, which we may have to, who knows. That was a breakout year. 2008 and 2009 were breakout years for us. People will remember in 2008, we flipped the state Senate. Thank you. Which I guess we have to do again. But even as there were some pretty severe disappointments there, flipping it was the right thing to do, and we will flip it again with better people. And so that will be a great accomplishment. Also in 2009, in the spring of 2009, we started to really hit our stride in legislative accomplishments. We passed the Fair Share Tax Reform Act, working with a lot of people, 1199, many others, on that very important battle. In the fall of that year, the Green Jobs, Green New York bill passed, and then later in the fall of that year, all of the electoral victories in New York City that some of you saw earlier today on stage, the election of the Progressive Caucus of the City Council, and including some citywide races. So we're feeling pretty good. And some other people decided this was not something they really liked. And there's some Irish folk here. Remember the Troubles? The Trouble, we like to think of as the WP Troubles, began in the summer of 2009 and continuing for the next, really nonstop for the next 18 months. A combination of political and business and media and legal and ideological attacks on all of us, on our organization, and on what we believe and what we stand for, began. And it was a shock. We were in some ways naive, perhaps, and perhaps we weren't taking ourselves as seriously as our enemies took us. So that's an important lesson that we all learned. But the Real Estate Board of New York didn't like what we were doing on rent regulation. The Chamber of Commerce didn't like what we were doing on paid sick days. Related companies, those in the city know Related, they didn't like what we were talking about on living wage. Gibson and Dunn. Gibson and Dunn is the premier right-wing law firm in America. They're the ones, by the way, when people follow this Chevron case in Ecuador, where they're trying to make sure that the indigenous people of Ecuador get no benefit besides polluted water. The same lawyer who came after us is Chevron's lawyer. Just pointing that out. Tom Golisano announced he's leaving the state. People remember this? He announced when we passed the Fair Share Tax Reform, he held a press conference announcing that because his taxes were going up $13,000 per day, he was moving to Florida. And we said to one reporter who called up and actually asked, you need to ask him, what does he make to earn, to have to pay $13,000 per day? Hadn't occurred to anybody in the press corps yet. The answer, of course, is you have to earn $650,000 per day to pay this additional surcharge of 2% of 13 grand. So our view was, you really should stop complaining. On and on. The state Republican Party, the New York Post began what can only be described as a crusade against us. The Post ran about 110 articles denouncing the party over those next 8 or 10 months. My father used to say, you know, fish are too good for this newspaper. But in any case, it was a real coordinated. Hillary Clinton was correct. There really is a vast right-wing conspiracy. We're actually seeing it again now, and we were on the receiving end of that. One very prominent consultant, whose name shall be mentioned, Norman Adler, said it was the beginning of the end for the Working Families Party. I think he was kind of pleased about that. So we were hammered in the press. Our bank account was essentially empty. We used up 10 years of reserves that we had built up very carefully over a 10-year period. By the summer and fall of 2010, as we headed into the gubernatorial, we had a gubernatorial nominee who was not super enthusiastic about being our nominee. And our image of ourselves as the independent voice of New York, and that's an important word, independent, the independent voice of New York's working families was in doubt because we didn't know. Had all these attacks. There were many of them, some of my, 2 or 3 of my favorite, you know, we were going to get on to an election on November 3rd, I think it was. Were we, this is the New York Post loved calling us the cat's paw of a corrupt labor movement. Were we, the Daily News, the scam artists, born by Acorn in 1199. My personal favorite, the morally corrosive and economically destructive Working Families Party. The beautiful thing about democracy is that people actually do get to make up their own minds. And it had always been our view that if people had decent information and time and resources, and above all, organization, they would make good decisions. So election day rolled around, and I remember the night before, I left the office early. I think I left a few minutes before midnight. The place was full. Team Boland was there. There must have been 55 people in the office. And I remember leaving with kind of awe at the backbone that the staff had shown. Through these many months, organizers, the mobilizers, the canvassers, the data entry people, the admin staff. And the next day, about 186,327 New Yorkers said, yes, we believe you, we don't believe them. We really wanted 200,000 because then we had that whole Matt Damon thing where you had to put on the Yankees cap. But we were pretty satisfied. It's a big number. That means out of every 25 New Yorkers in the state, one of them voted for us. We'd like 2. I think we can get it up to 5 out of 25 over the next couple of years. But that's something to keep in mind. So there were some lessons we all learned on this. One I mentioned is that we need to take ourselves very seriously. We have, as Bob likes to say, when you gore the corporate ox, they're pretty unhappy. And they showed that over and over. Another unbelievable lesson for all of us, which is evident today, is that it is really, really good to have friends. Nobody turned their back on us. The key principle, I'm around the labor movement a lot, but I've never really been part of it, except very briefly, a long time ago. But what is the key principle of the labor movement? Solidarity. And I have never felt so much solidarity as in those many months. In a sense, it is always like this. We are part of a long, long train of organizers, of activists, of progressives who for centuries, literally, have decided, no, we're not going to just take the world as it is, as the way it has to be. And things do not happen fast. I read a book not long ago about the growth of the anti-slavery movement. The first meeting in 1787 in London, 5 people. 51 years later, they finally passed the first anti-slave trafficking law. There was only one person left of that original 5 who was still alive. Or Seneca Falls. People know Seneca Falls. 1848, first sort of the early birth of the feminist movement, suffrage movement. There was one woman alive 75 years later who had been at Seneca Falls when suffrage finally passed in 1923. We are in that tradition. This is not the work of a weekend, good as a weekend may be. It's a work of a lifetime, and it is. And I realized today that we obviously survived 2010, but I didn't realize how strong we were until tonight. And I am just so thrilled that there's so many people here who share this vision we have for building a more humane and decent and just society. Now, none of this would have happened without the person I'm going to introduce next.